sort of the history of ABAG, MTC, how they got connected, what they do now, and answer any questions you have. How much time do we have?
Half an hour.
Okay, so ABAG was formed in 1961, and you may not have heard the story, but what happened is an organization, I believe it was the Bay Area Council, came up with the idea of consolidating the three airports, Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose, and all the bus operators, about 27 of them, but they didn't talk to the cities about it. They ran a bill in Sacramento, went through one house of the state legislature, and the mayor of Berkeley found out about it, and you can imagine he was pretty livid. He called a meeting of all of the cities. 70 mayors showed up on short notice. They went to Sacramento and killed that bill, which would have taken away local control from all of them. They also thought, this could happen again. So they decided to create the Association of Bay Area Governments to basically help them protect their interests in Sacramento, but also more and more to develop programs that would benefit each of the cities. And I'll go through those in a few minutes. So the goal now is to sort of foster partnerships. The membership is the 101 cities and 9 counties of the Bay Area. MTC was created about 10 years later by the state legislature. And it was required that each region in the state of California have what was called a metropolitan planning organization to help decide how to spend federal and state money. But they were created by an act of the state legislature. ABAG was generated out of an agreement among the 101 cities and 9 counties to create a joint powers authority. And they were the first one in the state of California. So they kind of went along on their own paths. ABAG was doing housing research, land use work, publishing documents, doing research, and running the programs that were benefiting the cities. And I'll go over those in a couple of minutes. And MTC's role was purely on the transportation side. Then a few years back, MTC thought it might be a good idea to absorb ABAG so they wouldn't argue as much about Plan Bay Area. And so they fought, and I can give you more details about it, but basically the attempt by MTC to take over ABAG failed. And then the 2 boards decided what they wanted to do is take over ABAG's planning department, which was 20 of the 70 people who worked for ABAG. If that had happened, ABAG would have gone out of business within a year to 18 months because they would have been deprived of the money they used for their planning department. Instead, there was a decision to combine the entire staff of ABAG with the entire staff of MTC. And each board would remain independent with its own authority, statutory authority, and independent programs, but a single staff would serve both boards. So that decision was made in July of 2017. The staff was consolidated July 1st, 2017. And in 2019, they agreed to revisit the idea of combining the 2 boards. They did that 2 years later, decided not to combine the boards, but instead decided to look at consolidating a couple of their committees to streamline the process. Now, if I could screen share with you now, you'd see this drawing or graph of how the 2 agencies relate to one another. But ABAG has a contract of services to MTC to operate all of its programs and all of its staff. And the next slide would show you kind of how the combined staff is set up. There's an executive director, Therese McMillan, who is the executive director of both ABAG and MTC. Under her is general counsel and administrative people. And then there are 4 senior staff positions, 3 deputy directors and a finance director. When the consolidation happened, MTC had a deputy director for policy and operations. When we consolidated, I was the deputy director of ABAG at the time. Then I became the acting director of ABAG. And then after the consolidation, I became the deputy executive director for local government services. And in a second, I'll go through what that means. The committee structure is, and I can go through this in more detail, but ABAG has a number of committees. They have an executive board made up of 35 people who are appointed by the cities and counties. So depending on how populous a county is, they may have 1 or 2 city representatives. And they are picked by that county's association of mayors and council members. So in Alameda County, they have an association of mayors and council members who select the person who serves on the ABAG executive board. ABAG is actually run by a general assembly where every city Each of the 101 cities has a representative that meets at least once a year in June. The 9 counties each send a representative. And that General Assembly has to approve the annual ABAG budget and work plan and the annual dues structure. They're the only people empowered to do that. They delegate to the 35-member executive board the sort of day-to-day operations of the organization. And they're able to, between budget meetings, add money. If new grants come in, the executive board is allowed to add that revenue to the budget, but they're not allowed to take money out of the budget without the General Assembly's permission. The committee structure for ABAG, there's an administrative committee that studies recommendations assigned by the ABAG executive board. So they're given tasks from time to time by the 35-member executive board. The finance committee does the budgetary work and the financial work. There is a relatively new housing committee. The ABAG housing committee was set up about 1.5 years ago to deal with BAFA, which I'll talk about. And there's a joint legislation committee with MTC. The General Assembly, as I mentioned, meets at least once a year to adopt the ABAG annual budget work plan and the dues structure. They can meet more often if they choose to, and have done that over the years, to do programs about topics that the member cities and counties are interested in. The ABAG with MTC works on Plan Bay Area and the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And by itself, ABAG is responsible for a portion of the Regional House Needs Allocation and the Regional Housing Technical Assistance Program. The Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA as you know it, is a number that the State Office of Housing and Community Development creates for each of the regions in the Bay Area. Once that number is assigned to the Bay Area, ABAG's task is to come up with a plan with a methodology to distribute that number in a fair and transparent way under state law. For as long as I can remember, what they do is they create a RHNA methodology committee made up of stakeholders and city officials from all over the region, balanced by geography, city, and county, to assist us in putting together that methodology. And I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail in a little while. Plan Bay Area 2050 began in 2013, and I got to ABAG about 2 months before that first Plan Bay Area was adopted. The first plan only talked about transportation and housing. There was a revision 4 years later. It gets revised every 4 years. And last year, at the end of last year, we adopted the third iteration of Plan Bay Area, which now includes not only transportation and housing, with an eye toward reducing GHG and greenhouse gases, but also the economic and environmental strategies the region needs to really create a better future. And I had slides for each one of these, but I'll just go through them and say that there were in the, I'll just go to further along because this makes more sense. So some of you may have heard of CASA, which didn't stand for anything, but it was an effort. It didn't have it wasn't an acronym. It was an effort by the former director of MTC and ABAG, Steve Heminger, to create a grand bargain around housing. The concept, and I wasn't involved in setting this up, this was just before the staff consolidation took place, but the concept was that there were a number of stakeholders in Sacramento that had the ability to stop their opponents from doing anything. And as a result, nothing got done in Sacramento. So you had tenants advocates, private for-profit developers, you had cities, you had local communities, you had nonprofit developers, you had unions, and they're all at odds and nothing got done. So a representative group of all of these people were invited to come in to CASA, to a process that went on for over a year. And the question was, are you willing to give up something to get what you want? And in the end, there was a CASA compact created that had 10 pieces to it. And those 10 pieces had to do with what were called the 3 Ps: production of new affordable housing, preservation of existing housing to prevent its gentrification and the displacement of tenants, and protection for tenants who are living in throughout the Bay Area. So each of those 10 ideas that went forth from the CASA Compact spoke to one of those 3 things. What really changed everything was, let me go back a slide, was something called AB 1487, which then Assemblyman David Chu proposed, that would allow ABAG and MTC to raise funding across all 9 counties at once. I don't have to tell any of you that RENA mandates that cities like San Francisco have to produce a certain number of housing units in every income level, very low income, moderate, and above market, or market and above. And in order to meet the needs or to meet the requirements for the affordable housing takes a lot of subsidy, and the state doesn't provide any, or provides very little, I should say. And so unless you can ramp up the amount of subsidy available and figure out a way to lower the cost per unit, no one is going to reach their RENA goals for affordable housing. So AB 1487 was an attempt to deal with that. It allows ABAG and MTC to raise funding across all 9 counties at the same time. And it gives to both ABAG and MTC the ability to decide when a measure goes on the ballot, what the revenue source is, and what kind of plan would be used, how the money would be spent. The idea behind this was, and maybe some of you remember, there was a initiative a few years back that was for the infrastructure around the Bay to restore and improve the quality of the Bay. It was a parcel tax, $12 per parcel. It went on all 9 counties at once. And it has to get 2/3 when you aggregate the vote in all 9 counties, and it passed. That generates $25 million a year for 20 years to be spent on programs and projects that improve the quality of the Bay, the quality of the water, protect against sea level rise, and create or make it easier for people to access the Bay. So this is the same concept, but for housing. So there was an attempt to, or there was a thought about putting this on the ballot in November of 2020, but then COVID hit. So instead, there was a pivot to wait, but to do something called an expanded regional housing portfolio. What could we do with a small amount of money to really make a difference and put in place programs that people could understand, could support, and would be funded by the larger bond when that went on the ballot. The idea is to do a general obligation bond across all 9 counties at the same time, and it would generate between $1 and $2 billion a year for affordable housing and homelessness prevention for 10 years. So not this past summer, but the summer before, the state of California gave ABAG $20 million for 5 pilot programs, which I'll describe briefly now, and I can answer more questions about. The first project is called Doorway. If you're looking for affordable housing in the Bay Area, just in San Francisco, you have to go to every single development that opens up. You have to go to their offices, get a paper application, fill it out. The applications are not standardized. After you hand it in, it's sometimes hard to figure out where they are in the process, when the lottery happens, and who wins. So my son 2 years ago went from high school to college. When I went to college, I had to fill out a separate application for every school I applied to and pay a fee for everyone. Mm-hmm. My son filled out one standard application. It's the way people do things now. So you fill out a standardized application with an essay question. And at the bottom, you say, what colleges do you want us to send this to? And usually each college has its own one essay you have to fill out, but it's standardized the whole thing. San Francisco did this a few years ago with something called Dahlia. 2016, they standardized and put online applications for affordable housing in San Francisco. Since then, they've got 1 million hits on the website. 97% of all applications now are done online for affordable housing in San Francisco. Doorway would take that idea and expand it to all 9 counties to the entire Bay Area. That's the first project. The second project, you'll be surprised to hear, didn't already exist, and that was what's called the Affordable Housing Pipeline. It's an updated list of every affordable housing project in the Bay Area. And does it have its approvals? Does it have its EIR? Does it have its funding? If so, how much? And how much does it need to finish and break ground? Until about 4 years ago, that didn't exist. 3 years ago, we actually at ABAG funded a group, Enterprise Community Partners, to put it together. And it turned out there was something like 275 projects that were in various states of approval and funding. The reason this is important is if there's a windfall of money, if the federal government tomorrow decided to spend more money on affordable housing, the Bay Area got $500 million, the question would be, well, what would be the best way to spend it? You could give a little bit to every one of the 270, now probably 325 projects, which wouldn't do much, Or you could say there's 50 projects that are 10 to 20% short of the money they need to break ground. If you take that money and give it to those 75 projects that meet that criteria, you could break ground in 60 days and in 18 months have 30,000 units ready to go, which would have a real impact. So that's the affordable housing pipeline project. The preservation strategy is really a new idea that's been around for a little while, and that is, as you probably have read, it can cost anywhere between $750,000 and $1 million a unit, all in, to build an affordable housing unit. It also takes 6 to 8 years to do it. Now, why is that? Like a private developer, you have to spend 2 or 3 years getting it approved. But the funding for affordable housing comes from 3, 4, 6, 7 different sources. They're on different timelines. Sometimes you have to get one before you can apply for the other, and it just takes forever. And that is not an effective way to do things. If you could buy a building, and I'll give you an example, in unincorporated Alameda County recently, a nonprofit called Eden Housing had built an 80-unit affordable housing brand new project in the neighborhood. There was a family that owned across the street 23 units, apartment building built in the 1960s. It needed some work, but it was a pretty good shape, and they wanted to get out of the business. So Eden Housing bought it. Most of the tenants in there were paying, because the building wasn't a new building, they were paying relatively reasonable rents. Probably 3/4 of the people in there would have qualified for affordable housing in the new building across the street if there were enough rooms there. And so what they did is they bought it from the private sector, and then they deed restricted it as permanent affordable housing going forward. It costs usually a little bit less than building one, but you do it right away. And the people who live there don't live in fear of somebody buying their building and renovating it and raising the rent so they have to move out. So that's what the preservation strategy is. The Anti-Displacement Services Network is to coordinate and highlight the best practices for rental assistance and tenant protection services. What does that mean? There is a plan now to work with tenants who are having a hard time paying the rent and giving them rental assistance, kind of like the federal Section 8 program at the local level. And I'll give you an example. When you have people, let's say you have a couple with 2 children living in the Mission, they work at entry-level minimum wage jobs, and they're paying 60, 70% of their income for rent. They also have in their savings account $40 because they live paycheck to paycheck. If one of those people gets sick or one gets laid off, they'll miss rent payment and they could go into an eviction spiral. They'll probably move into a friend's house for a little while. Then they may end up buying either an RV or sleep in their car, and they eventually end up in a homeless shelter or on the street. The idea behind this program is there's a way you can find those people and say to them, we'll make you a deal. For 2 years, we'll cover half your rent, 2/3 of your rent. You have to take some of that savings and put it in a reserve account. But during those 2 years, we're going to do something very important. One of you will put through community college so you get a certificate to get an entry-level job in healthcare, and we'll support you in that. So when you're done, you'll be making 2 times, maybe 3 times what you're making at McDonald's. The other person in the family, the other adult, will go through a carpenter's apprentice training program. So in a year when they come out, they'll be an apprentice carpenter, and they will be making, again, 2 or 3 times as much money as they make now. What that does for them is it means they have the money to pay their rent. They have reserves in case one of them gets sick, and they can wait for an affordable project if they still qualify, because they can afford to stay where they are now, and they can afford to absorb higher housing costs. So that's what the anti-displacement, the core of the Anti-Displacement Services Network is. And finally, the homelessness prevention system, which is connected to that. A lot of people, and I have to explain this to people all the time, and you know this, that 10 years ago, San Francisco spent about $250 million, $250 million on homeless services all in. So that's shelters, supportive services, mental health services, healthcare, anything related to homelessness was $250 million. Now it's closer to $1 billion. And people look around and they say, wait a minute, 10 years ago, there were fewer people on the streets. So we're spending 4 times as much money and there's more homeless people. And the math that causes that is that the city can take people off the street, but in the time it takes them to take 2 people off the street, 3 or 4 people end up on the street. So unless you can go upstream and stop that math, you're never going to get ahead of the game. And so part of this is the same idea, the same concept I just explained on anti-displacement services, is find these people who are at risk of homelessness, intervene early, give them the job training they need. There's huge labor shortages and construction all over the place. We can train people for these better paying jobs, or maybe for a job that they haven't had a job for a while. And that's going to begin to really make a dent in the problem. So those are the 5 pilot programs. We've started working on all of them. And by the time we go to the ballot in now, we hope November 2024, we can honestly say to the voters, if you vote yes on this money will be used for these programs, and we'll just be able to scale them up and have even greater success. In terms of the money, if it's $1 billion a year for 10 years, 80% of that goes back to the county that generated the revenue. So in the case of San Francisco's share of that over 10 years, the $10 billion is, I think, 1.2 or 1.4 billion new resources for the city of San Francisco that wouldn't have had otherwise. Smaller counties like Marin and Napa and Sonoma will get less. But 80% of that money that's raised goes back to the county, and the county decides how to spend it. ABAG and MTC have nothing to say about it. 20% of it will come back to us at BAFA, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, to help fund these 5 ideas as pilots for the region. I've got a slide here on RENA, and I know this is an issue of great interest, not just in San Francisco, but all over the region. And as you know, the big RENA number that we got this year was multiple times higher than in the past. And right now, San Francisco is scrambling to get its housing element finished. It submitted it to the state sent it back with a number of concerns, and now San Francisco is working to try to answer the questions that the State Office of Housing Community Development had. This time around, and especially for cities like, not San Francisco, but for a lot of the small to medium-sized cities, they had no resources to deal with this crisis for them. And so we created several programs, regional housing technical assistance programs, we call them, that had to do with providing direct resources, funding, and standardized data for them to help them do their housing elements. In total, there were 3 sources of money: LEAP, REAP, and Senate Bill 1. And each one was about $25 million. So what does this mean? When you do a housing element, there's a whole chapter on what's the housing in your community today? How many single family units? How many multifamily units? How old is the housing? It's a lot of work. ABAG was able to go into its computer generated data systems and do a standardized data set for every one of the 101 cities and 9 counties. We then went to HCD and said, if a city uses this database, will that meet your requirements? And they said yes. So we gave to each of the 101 cities and 9 counties a little data stick they could plug in to their computer and just download this to do a whole chapter of the housing element. Now, this doesn't, you can add to it, but if you send just what was on this data set we sent you, you would meet HCD's requirements. We also have consultants who are experts in parking and parking requirements, experts in design, experts in all kinds of things that you could either hire yourself, or for smaller cities and towns, we would do a purchase order and send you that consultant off one of our benches for that type of consultant for the number of hours you needed. So you wouldn't have to go through the whole procurement process, would take up time. And when you only have 2 people in your planning department in some of these smaller cities, that's a big deal. Let me just take a second to talk about local government services. In my division, we have the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, which I just described, which we're now staffing up. We have something called the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, ABAG Power, the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and the ABAG Finance Authority. I'll go through each one of them quickly. ABAG Power is a natural gas buying club for 38 participating jurisdictions. So we buy natural gas at a discount, and it's a JPA. Anybody that wants to can join. We've been doing this since 1998. And now we're helping cities transition from natural gas to sustainable gas to electricity, as that becomes more and more what the state and the federal government are pushing us toward. And this is all provided to these cities on a volunteer basis. My favorite is BayREN, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network. These were created back in 2012 by the state's CP, the State Public Utilities Commission. The first three were LA, San Diego, and the Bay Area. And what they do is they work with local jurisdictions and homeowners and apartment owners. So I'll give you a couple of examples. They have a single family energy conservation program, which is very popular. They will send a vetted contractor to your house if you're a homeowner. And that contractor will go through the house and say, if you do these 7 things, you'll reduce your energy usage by 15 to 20%. They will then say the state has rebates for 6 of these 7 things that will cut the cost in half or maybe more. We have the forms, the rebate forms, and we will fill them out for you. And once you do that, you'll get the rebate and you'll be able to save considerable on your energy bill and your energy usage. We do this for both single family homes and multifamily homes. The newest program, which is even better, is the Water Upgrade Saves program. Same concept. We piloted this in Windsor, California and Hayward, California with single family and multifamily. A vetted contractor goes in and says, if you do these 7 things, you'll cut your water usage in single family homes by 20% and in some apartments 20 to 25%. We've done a deal, we've worked out an agreement with the water district that serves you, and we will go in with a contractor and do the work for you at no cost up front. Whatever it costs, there are some rebates, we'll get those for you. Whatever's left will go on your water bill as a 0% no interest loan for a year, 2 years, 3 years till it's paid off. But even with that on your water bill, the savings will at least give you a 20% of that reduction you'll get the benefit of right away. And when the work is paid off with the no interest loan, you'll get 100% of that. Again, with the drought and all the problems we've been having, this is an extremely popular program. We're growing it around the region right now. The other things that this group does is they have a codes and standards program that works with cities that want to do energy reach codes or do incentive programs to help people conserve energy. We have a staff person that goes in and works with cities to help them do that. It's an expert. We also now we're starting to work with small businesses, and these are basically the programs that BayREN does all over the 9 boroughs. The SRA partnership was created by the federal government back in the 1990s, late 1990s. There are 25 federally recognized estuaries of national significance. The San Francisco Bay and Estuary is one of those. So our staff works with the Bay Conservation Development Commission staff, with the Coastal Conservancy on programs to improve water quality and the quantity of fresh water coming into the bay. They also do demonstration projects for natural barriers to sea level rise. In Hayward, where there was a salt marsh, the salt marsh was donated back to the city. The city looked at the old maps, and after breaching the dikes around it, with a backhoe, put back the old streams and rivers. And the tidal action going in and out over 10 years has raised that 3 feet. The silt collecting on the land that's been backhoed up. And then they've planted natural plants on there, and it's created a natural levee across the front of Hayward. They're about to start a similar program like that in Richmond. And this is also, they staff, along with the California Coastal Conservancy, the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. That's the group that did the region-wide bond measure that raises $25 million a year for 20 years. That was Measure AA a few years back. And finally, the Advancing California Finance Authority, or AGFA, it was set up by ABAG many years ago in 1978 to help smaller cities and towns float tax-exempt bonds to build parks, schools, medical clinics, affordable housing. Since it started, it's helped provide $8 billion in tax-exempt financing for local cities and counties to build infrastructure around the region. That's the end of my formal presentation. I'm going to go back. I'm going to get rid of this and go back to the full screen, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, Brad, thank you very much. That was a very impressive presentation. Blew my mind, believe me. and gave me more information than I thought I would need. But I just
But I'm
wanted,
sure people have questions, so fire away.
I'm just saying by way of preface, excuse me, I'm saying by way of preface, we are going on 9 o'clock soon. So people, let us keep our questions brief, succinct, to the point, and we will start with the first hand. Okay, there we got a hand going up already. Okay, Mary Eliza.
Okay, I just want to mention to Brad that he can send us an email, the PowerPoint and email, and we'll share it if you
I'd be
like.
happy to do that.
That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Claire.
I just like all the acronyms defined. I thought that they were used throughout, and for some of us, we don't know all of them, and some people know some and not the rest. So to define all the acronyms, please.
I'll do, I'll in my email, I'll do that, all the ones that I mentioned.
Thank you.
But right now we know what ABAG and MTC are.
And BAFA is the one you hear me, it's the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. It was the name of the bill that Chu put through the state legislature to set up the Regional Finance Authority for Affordable Housing.
Right. Mary Eliza, you still have your hand up?
Yes, I actually had a question I wanted to ask, and that has to do with the RENA accounts.
Yeah.
I would just like to know who is responsible for determining what gets counted in the RENA numbers, because we hear a lot of very confused ideas from a lot of different cities. We're involved with other cities as well. So could you just tell me which organization is responsible for determining?
I will send you the contact information for the people at the State Office of Housing and Community Development that ultimately make it. But it is confusing because in the old days, when I first started at ABAG back in 2013, I went to a meeting on Plan Bay Area, and the mayor of Corte Madera in Marin came up to me and said, "I can't believe you guys won't count assisted living units for our RENA numbers." And I said, first of all, I'm with ABAG. We don't make those decisions, but I have to tell you, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And that kind of took her back for a minute, because think about this. You have people, senior citizens living in homes, single family homes, often their partner, they're divorced. One of the two parents has passed away. The kids have moved on. It's a three-bedroom apartment, a three-bedroom single family home with one person living in it. If you could, in the same community, build assisted living where that person would feel comfortable moving and being near their family and friends, you're freeing up a single family home for a real family. We should be incentivizing people to do that, not creating roadblocks. There's been a little bit of movement, but not enough in that area. So even though we don't set the rules, I think we can be helpful in changing some of the rules and saying to HCD, this makes no sense. If you're not going to count units that we're preserving as affordable housing, or you're not going to count assisted living because there's not a full kitchen in the unit, there's a small kitchen and people have food programs, it just doesn't make any sense. And so we're in the process of looking at, we're asking the same questions you are, because we hear different things from people in the state sometimes. We want to know definitively what counts and what doesn't count toward the RENA numbers. So for instance, if you approve a project, but it's not getting built, that doesn't count. But if you've approved the project and it's in the ground and it's 6 months away from being completed, there's some debate among our staff about when that number kicks in and is it actually counted. Is it when you pull the permit and so much percentage of the construction is done? Is it when you pull the occupancy permit? When does that happen? So we're going to try to do some research on that and come up with sort of a one-page fact sheet on what the final decisions are at HCD about what counts and what doesn't count. And once we learn that, and I'm particularly interested in lobbying HCD to be more flexible, particularly when it comes to some of their rules that just don't make any sense.
Okay. Let me ask, we have two callers online that can't raise their hands. Leanne, do you have a question for our speaker?
No, but he sure gave us a lot of information. And can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Especially the part about the rebates. I would like to see that written up.
Yeah, that was great to know. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay,
I have
Eileen,
to say, about just before we did the staff consolidation, so we're talking 1916, I'm sorry, 2016. If you looked at the ABAG and MTC websites, they look like somebody made them in the late 70s, early 80s. They were awful. The websites now are actually quite good. And so if you go on the ABAG website, you can go to energy programs, you can go to BayREN, and you can see examples of the applications, how you apply, who you get in touch with. But I will send you contact information, particularly for the BayREN programs, because they're very popular both for energy and water.
that would be great.
That
Eileen,
would be great. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Okay, Eileen, do you have a question? Thank you, Leanne. Eileen, do you have a
Thanks.
question?
Not at this point, just to thank Brad for, coming across with all his technical difficulties. We appreciate your presentation, and even those who follow ABAG and MTC, there's a lot of new information here. So thank you for joining us, and if others have questions, I'll turn the floor back over to you, Charles.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn,
Yeah, just a quick, because of the time, if you could send a link or citation for the programs you are developing around housing, particularly housing for homeless individuals, that would be very helpful as well, Brad.
There's a book we put out that really documents all this, and I'll give you a link to that. There's a slide deck that kind of talks a little bit more in more detail about the 5 pilot programs that I mentioned. I'll send that as well.
Great, thank
okay,
you.
great, thank
But
you, Brad.
the person, and 2 quick things, the person that we hired to run BAFA is the woman who a few years back was running the San Francisco housing program, a woman named Kate Hartley.
Oh,
But
yeah.
Kate worked for the housing department in Berkeley for a while. I think she worked in Oakland for a little while. She was in San Francisco, not as the director, but running programs. Then for a few years, she was the director. And most recently, she was put in charge of a $350 million housing incubator fund that the San Francisco Foundation and others put together. But when one of my assistants and I were putting together the job description for the head of this program, I said to Daniel, I said, if you could have anybody in California for this job, who would you want? He said, oh, that's easy, Kate Hartley. And I said to him, that's funny. I would say the same thing. She is brilliant in the way she thinks outside of the box and doesn't think like a government official. There was a program, remember I told you the story about the housing, the 24-unit building in unincorporated Alameda, where they wanted to buy it and make it permanently affordable. There's a thing called the welfare tax exemption, which you can get when you make something affordable. The Alameda County, normally their housing department would do that for you, but they needed to do it in 3 weeks. They had to have this to convince the bank they could get the financing to do the whole deal. Alameda County said, we're too busy right now, go find somebody else. So they called Kate up with 2.5 weeks left. And she said, we should do this for people that need it. We should be a one-stop place where people just call us up and we can turn it around in a couple of days. She sent me a memo. I agreed with her. We met with our director and we created that program in 3 weeks and got the money to them. They had a glitch where they had to wait 1 more week. We actually created the program in 3 weeks and got the money to them. We have to give them $5,000 per unit. It's one of the 5 conditions to get the welfare tax exemption. So we created a government program in 3 weeks. And that's what I want to see BAFA do, is not act like some huge bureaucracy, but find creative ways to help people and turn around programs quickly.
Yeah, amen to that. Claire,
Thank you. I'm wondering how much you really know about assisted living and what those opportunities are. There are very few assisted living facilities around. They are extremely hard to find vacancies to place people in. And if someone is living in their home that has been paid for, why would they want to spend $5,000 a month to live in an assisted living facility and be in some community that's far distant from their neighborhoods, their families, and their cities? So I really think that you need to do a little more research into assisted living and forcing people or strongly encouraging them to leave their homes that are very affordable and move into assisted living that will cost them more money than Medicare or Social Security or their retirement can pay for, and they may or may not have families who can subsidize over $5,000 a month to reside in an assisted living facility. Not to mention, we don't have those facilities available.
I just, no,
Openly,
I couldn't agree with you more. I just came back. I grew up in Massachusetts. My mother's 97. We had to put her in assisted living. And we were fortunate to find there was one opening, and the nicest one, family owned, near where I grew up. But it's incredibly expensive. There were nowhere near enough. And so one of the things that we've been talking about, and this is, I think, to your point, is what can you do to help somebody stay in their home? One idea, there's a woman in Richmond who was featured in a video where, she was probably, I'm guessing, in her mid to late 60s. Her daughter was going to have to leave the Bay Area because she couldn't afford a home here. So she built an ADU, what's it called? There's something dwelling unit. I can't remember the
Accessory dwelling unit.
Accessory dwelling unit. Sorry, it's late. She built a 400 square foot, 350 square foot unit in her backyard, and then let her daughter's husband, and their 2 kids move into her home. So she was close to her family. She was providing babysitting for them when they needed it. She even built a little loft in her unit so that her grandson could come and sleep up in the loft when he came to stay with her. You can also flip that the other way, where the person who's in the home stays in the home, but if they need income to pay taxes or to do improvements on their home, they can build an ADU in their backyard and use that rent money for that. I'm not arguing that, and I hope you don't think I was saying that we should have everybody that in a single family home have to move into assisted living. The mayor of Corte Madera was talking about when people wanted to do that. But even in Corte Madera and in Marin, there's not a lot of assisted living places, and even the ones you have, not all of them are very nice.
Thank you.
No, and there's fewer.
Glenn, we've got time for one more question. So Glenn, over to you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, Brad, have you heard of it's a foster senior care, which is extremely inexpensive, and the seniors all gather around the TV, watch the living room, watch TV. They have a cook that provides them meals, and it's supposed to be half or a quarter the cost of regular senior care. Have you heard of this?
No. Do you have any information you could send me?
I'll do my best. Thank you. I'll do that.
Because the cost, in Massachusetts, assisted living costs from $6,000 to $12,000 a month. It's ridiculous.
Carolyn, is your hand still up? Carolyn? I guess not.
I don't see a hand up.
Okay.
No, my hand, I should have taken it down. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
That's what,
Okay,
that
again,
6 to 12 is a little higher than in the Bay Area, but it's close to that. The other thing is, quite bluntly, I'm going to bring it up. You all know I have Dexter. He is a Doberman. He is my service dog, and in assisted living, I could not have him. And so quality of life is a serious issue. And Brad, you've encountered it. I encourage you to explore it further and understand the complexities involved. And maybe ABAG can help build more assisted living facilities or options that would give people other choices. And that's the end of my rant. Thank you.
Well, if I could have one more minute, I think what you bring up is an important point, because as you all know, building housing anywhere is difficult. There's lots of community opposition. And one of the things that we've heard as a top priority is senior housing and assisted living. And I think in neighborhoods around the Bay Area, if you're going to do that so that people, and especially if it's affordable, assisted living and affordable senior housing, I think there might be less opposition to that than other kinds of affordable housing.
okay, Brad, again, thank you so much. You've been the perfect speaker tonight. You've answered all of our questions. And whew, I'm exhausted.
And listen, you have my contact information. If any of you have questions after you look at the materials I'm sending you, please feel free to call me or email me.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Okay, good night.